Hello Daily Drafters, and welcome to the continuation of the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Archetype Skeleton set review. Here at Daily Draft, we do things a little differently when it comes to set review season. Rather than give a card-by-card analysis and grade each card individually, here we build what are called Archetype Skeletons, one for each color pair. This isn't a concept that I came up with on my own. In fact, it was a common way to provide set review content before card-by-card reviews became more popular. But here at Daily Draft, we'd like to bring them back as I really do think that they can be a valuable resource for determining what each of the 10 color pairs might look like prior to your first drafts of the set. Now, obviously, we won't get everything correct, and these skeletons should be used for the first few drafts of the set for you. As the format evolves and we learn more about the cards in the set and how they interact with each other, the skeletons will evolve as well. But hopefully, these provide a good baseline for you to begin the format. Before we get into today's skeleton, I'd like to give you a breakdown of exactly how I arrived at what I did when it comes to what quantities of each rarity of card that will be included in each deck. I went ahead and collected data from each of the 46 Crimson Vow drafts on the channel when it comes to how many mythics, rares, uncommons, and commons each deck had, and I took an average for each rarity. That average came out to 2 mythic rares or rares, 5 uncommons, and 16 commons. Those numbers, plus 17 lands, make our 40-card draft deck. In addition, I will allow 4 commons to be a 2-of inclusion if I deem necessary, bringing the total to 8 1-of commons and 4 2-of commons. Don't worry, it'll all make sense as we get going. Lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out and thank you to all those in the subscriber community for choosing to spend a part of your day here with me. And for those of you that aren't subscribed yet, go ahead and click that red subscribe button attached to this video. Remember, it's absolutely free, doesn't cost you a dime, and you'll then be able to stay updated all through preview season and into draft season for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. With that out of the way, let's dive into our skeleton for the day. This video will be taking a look at blue-red, starting with Enthusiastic Mechanaut, which is a blue and a red for a 2/2 artifact creature Goblin Artificer at uncommon. It has flying, and it says that artifact spells you cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. So blue-red in this set cares about artifacts and artifacts entering the battlefield and getting triggers out of them. A lot of the times blue-red cares about instants and sorceries, so I like this take on blue-red. And as I built this deck for today's video, there's a ton of synergy with blue and red and artifacts in this set. Not only is there a ton of artifacts, there's a ton of artifact creatures, and there's a ton of artifact synergies in here. So I had a ton of fun building this deck, and I think this could be one of my favorite decks going into the format. So we'll see how this particular static ability on the Enthusiastic Mechanaut can go and help the rest of our deck in making the rest of our deck cheaper. First up, we've got Simian Sling, which for 1 red mana is a 1/1 artifact creature equipment monkey at common. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever Simian Sling or equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to defending player and has a reconfigure cost of 2. As a reminder, reconfigure basically means that this could function as an equipment that gives the equipped creature +1/+1 along with that static ability, or this can exist as itself as a 1/1 artifact creature that has that ability. Starting off the artifact synergies early, reconfigure is going to be great. This is just a nice little way to get a 1-drop down on the battlefield, get them for a little bit, and then you can either trade for an X1, or you can equip this later to make your creatures trade up. So we'll start with Simian Sling in our blue-red artifact deck. Next up is Voltage Surge, which for 1 red mana is an instant at common. It says as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice an artifact, and it deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and if its additional cost was paid, it deals 4 damage instead. Every red deck in this format is going to have 2 copies of Voltage Surge here in the skeletons, and this deck maximizes it the most. We're going to have a ton of artifacts in blue-red. You may not want to be sacrificing all of them. However, the opportunity of being able to do that when needed is going to make this card go from a B to a B+, even an A-. 1 mana instant speed, deal 4, even if you have to sack another artifact, is going to be big game, particularly in this deck, and really any red deck in this format. Next up is Armguard Familiar, which for 1 and a blue is a 2/1 artifact creature equipment beast at common. It has Ward 2, and it says that equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has Ward 2, and has a reconfigure cost of 4. At the end of the day, this is just a 2 mana, 2-drop artifact creature with upside. This can trade for their 2-drops, which is just fine. The Ward 2 on this particular creature doesn't matter very much because they're not going to be targeting this with removal all that often. But in the late game, if you want to reconfigure this on top of a bigger creature and give that creature +2/+1 in Ward 2, that's a big game. So being able to trade with their 2-drops, sometimes even 3-drops, and then in the late game make a creature that you control harder to target, that's a very good deal for a 2-drop in this format, particularly an artifact in this deck. And now we've got a copy of Automated Artificer, which is 2 generic mana for a 1/3 artifact creature Artificer at common. You can tap it to add a colorless mana to spend only to activate an ability or cast an artifact spell. 2 mana 1/3 is a pretty good blocker, holds down the fort, doesn't attack very well, but this is basically just like a 2 mana 1/3 mana dork in this deck. If you have a lot of artifacts, and I think your deck is going to know when you want this card and when you don't, you need a high density of artifacts to make sure that this can do its job. But in this particular skeleton, we're able to build it however we want. I built it with a lot of artifacts, so this is going to do some serious work in artifact-heavy decks. Next up is Kami's Flare for 1 and a red is an instant at common. It says Kami's Flare deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. It also deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller if you control a modified creature. Not much to say here. You've heard it twice before, and you're going to hear it one more time after this. We'll include 2 copies of Kami's Flare. It's probably the best removal spell in the entire set. It gives you a ton of upside if you are able to modify a creature. You'll play as many of these as you can get. Next is Mnemonic Sphere for 1 and a blue. It is an artifact at common. You can pay 1 and a blue to sacrifice it to draw 2 cards, or you can channel it, pay 1 blue, discard it to draw a card. So this ups our artifact count. It gives us an artifact to put onto the battlefield. It can be sacrificed. It's basically 4 mana to draw 2 cards in installment plans, which is pretty good. And it has a fail case of just for 1 mana to just cycle it away, draw a card. So I think if there's a deck in this format that wants this, it's this one. And if there are ways to, flicker artifacts or put them back into your hand, I know this doesn't give you an ETB, but returning this from your graveyard to your hand, things like that, that means this can go up in certain decks. But I just wanted to highlight that this could be good in blue-red artifacts if you're lacking for this type of card draw effect. Next, we have our first rare in the deck, the Reality Chip. For 1 and a blue, it is a 0/4 legendary artifact creature equipment jellyfish at rare. One of my favorite creature type text boxes in the entire format. It says that you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and as long as the Reality Chip is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, and you can reconfigure for 2 and a blue. So it's a little bit difficult to dissect exactly how this works, but essentially it's a 1 mana 0/4 that allows you to just look at the top card of your library, which I don't think is good enough on its own. But as soon as you reconfigure this on top of something, it doesn't give that creature any bonuses, but it allows you to play lands and cast spells off the top of your library. So what you can do with this is you can reconfigure this on top of just like random expendable creatures like 1/1s or anything like that. Maybe if you have the cantripping dog in white, if you happen to be in blue-white, you could put it on top of that, and then they're going to be incentivized to kill that creature to turn off the top of your library. So this gives you a lot of value, especially late in the game, and early in the game, it acts as a good blocker to help you get to the point where you can reconfigure it and put it on top of something. And again, in blue-red, it adds to our artifact count. Next, we've got Towashi Songshaper, which for 1 and a red is a 2/2 artifact creature human artificer at common. And it says that whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Towashi Songshaper gets +1/+0 until end of turn. You'll notice that in all of these deck archetype skeletons, I like to load up in the 2-drop slots. I want to try to figure out which 2-drops are good early in the format because 2-drops are the most important point on your mana curve in Limited, in my opinion. If you don't fill out those 2-drop slots with good or effective creatures, you're going to have a hard time winning a lot of games and making sure that you can get to some of the late game that you have. And Songshaper here is a 2-mana 2/2 with upside. It could attack as a 3 or even 4 powered creature sometimes. They're going to have to trade with it. And at common, I think for this blue-red deck, this is going to be a pretty good inclusion. Next is Acquisition Octopus, which for 2 and a blue is a 2/2 artifact creature equipment octopus at uncommon. Whenever it or equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and you can reconfigure it for 2 generic mana. So another artifact that is basically a 3-mana 2/2 that can attack to draw them a card. So I think it was several sets ago. It might have been Ikoria, Thieving Otter did the same thing, and that played out as a C-level card. It's not outstanding, but it does also block well in a way, because if they have a creature and you have this, they're not going to want to attack you to let you attack them back. Even if they have 2 creatures and you have this, and they attack you with 1 and you can remove the other creature, then you can get in with this. That's going to make them not want to attack with either of their creatures. So it does a pretty good job not only threatening good attacks, but also holding back their attackers on blocks as well. And then if you can just reconfigure this, put it on a flyer, put it on any creature with evasion, then you can really start going to town. It's a very versatile, good artifact for this deck. Moving right along to Covert Technician, which is 2 and a blue for a 2/4 artifact creature human ninja at uncommon. It has ninjutsu for 1 and a blue, and it says that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may put an artifact card with mana value less than or equal to that damage from your hand onto the battlefield. So it's a 3-mana 2/4 that could sometimes be a 2-mana 2/4 if you're able to return something to your hand. And if it hits, this deck already had at least 6 plus 2 or 1 mana artifacts that you could put into the battlefield for free, which is pretty good value. I mean, let's say you just kind of attacked with this one and you're able to put a Towashi Songshaper onto the battlefield. That's pretty good value. And at the end of the day, this blocks pretty well. So it's just another good artifact creature for this deck. You'll notice that almost every every single creature, almost every card that's not a removal spell that I've included in this deck so far is an artifact. And I don't even feel like I've reached for most of them. They all feel like they fit just fine. So I think the synergies are very apparent for this deck so far. Next we have Scrapyard Steelbreaker, which for 3 and a red is a 3/4 artifact creature human warrior at common, and you can pay a generic mana to sacrifice another artifact to give it +2/+1 until end of turn. So it's a 4-mana 3/4, which is fine, not great, but in this particular deck with the number of artifacts that we have, this ability is going to be, the threat of activation on this is going to be a serious problem for the opponent. I mean, we obviously don't want to be sacrificing our 2 and 3 mana artifact spells. We haven't seen a lot of ways to recurribly make cheap expendable artifacts, but if they don't block this and we have like 4 mana up and 4 artifacts on the battlefield and they're tapped out, they could be facing 10 damage out of nowhere. So this is basically a must block. It doesn't have trample, which is a disadvantage, but they have to put like a 5-powered attacker, a 4-powered attacker on this, or blocker, to make sure that this would die. So I think this is going to be a pretty good threat on our side of the battlefield, mainly because of threat of activation. Our flying fish is back in Skyswimmer Koi for 3 and a blue. It's a 3/3 creature fish at common. It has flying. And whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So it's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer. Unfortunately, this one is not an artifact. It's one of the only non-artifact creatures that would go in this deck. But I think it's pretty acceptable that they didn't make this an artifact. That might have pushed it over the top because it has artifact synergies built in. This one, in this particular deck, basically gives almost every other card in our deck the ability to loot when it enters the battlefield, as long as this is on the battlefield as well, which is a highly synergistic effect and something to not overlook. So we're definitely going to go ahead and include 2 copies of this, and then this can also just be something we can use a couple of our reconfigure cards on top of to protect, to make sure we can get in for extra damage. The second rare / mythic rare that we'll include in this deck is Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh. For 2 and 2 blue mana, it's a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Tezzeret at mythic rare. It says that the first activated ability of an artifact you activate each turn costs 2 generic less to activate. It has a +1 to draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. It has a -2 of target artifact becomes an artifact creature. If it isn't a vehicle, it has base power and toughness 4/4, and it has a -6 of you get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control becomes tapped, draw a card. So the amount of times that this card says artifact should tip off as to why I chose to include it in this deck. Tezzeret is the planeswalker that always cares about artifacts. Blue-red is the color pair in this set that cares the most about artifacts. Tezzeret fits very well into this deck. Not much more to say about it. It's a great planeswalker, and it's going to perform very well in basically any blue deck, and really any blue deck with a high artifact count. Next up is Twinshot Sniper for 3 and a red. Is a 2/3 artifact creature goblin archer at uncommon. It has reach, and it says that whenever Twinshot Sniper enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. You can also channel it for 1 and a red to discard it, and it deals 2 damage to any target. Again, not going to talk too much about this one. If you want to hear more analysis on this, check the other 2 red videos that I've already posted. This is an insane uncommon. Might be one of the best uncommons in the set. It can deal 2 damage on ETB. You have the buyout clause of paying 2 to deal 2 to anything. Great uncommon. It's also an artifact. We'll throw it right in here. Next up is Replication Specialist, which for 4 and a blue is a 3/4 creature Moonfolk Artificer at uncommon. It has flying, and it says that whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. This gives me vibes of the zombie card in the last set, the mythic rare, that kind of doubled all of your zombies. And this one's at uncommon. You do have to pay 1 and a blue to get that effect, but with the amount of artifacts that this deck has, especially 2-drop artifacts, it turns your 2-drop artifacts into 4 mana to get double the effect of those artifacts, which is kind of crazy. This isn't an artifact itself, but it is a 5 mana 3/4 flyer, which is, a C-. So at the end of the day, this is a really good top-end card for the artifact deck if you have a lot of cheap artifacts. Now, if your artifacts cost 4, 5, 6 mana, this may not do near as much as you want it to, but if you have a lot of cheap artifacts, this can really do the trick. Next is Saiba Trespassers for 4 and a blue. It is a 3/5 artifact creature Moonfolk Rogue at common. It also has Channel for 3 and a blue, where you can discard it to tap up to 2 target creatures you don't control. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Again, this card, good top end, 5 mana, 3/5, fine, not great, doesn't necessarily have flying or anything. It is an artifact itself. You also have a buyout of discarding it, paying 4 to tap down and keep tap down 2 creatures of theirs if you need to push through some damage. So having one of these in the top end, especially in an artifact deck, seems totally fine to me. Next we have Ironhoof Boar for 5 and a red. It is a 5/4 artifact creature boar at common. It has trample and haste. You can also channel it for 1 and a red, where you discard it, and it gives target creature +3/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. This is really good top end for pretty much any red aggressive deck. If you do have the 6 mana to get a trample haste, it comes 5 mana trample haste, 6 mana trample haste for a 5-powered creature out of nowhere can really do the trick. And then if you don't have that mana, or you really just need to push through some damage, you can get surprise lethal out of a combat trick attached to the other side. And it also is an artifact. So we have an expensive artifact if we want it, and we have a cheap combat trick if we want that. And last but not least, we've got Mirrorshell Crab, which for 5 and 2 blue is a 5/7 artifact creature crab at common. It has ward 3, and it also has channel for 2 and a blue, where you can discard it to counter target spell or ability unless its controller pays 3. Hopefully this is the last time I say artifact in this video. It's been quite a video full of artifacts, but here's our last one. It's a very expensive one. It's hard to kill. It'll dominate the board when it comes down if you do get to 7 mana. And if you don't, and you just need to counter something early, you can do that too. So we're going to finish the deck out here with Mirrorshell Crab. I hope this video is helpful in your preparation for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Be sure to stick around for the next video in this series, Black White, which will be hitting the channel at 7 AM Eastern Time tomorrow morning. Check out the Neon Dynasty Archetype Skeleton playlist as well to find all of the skeletons in this series in one location. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to give it a like and share it with a friend or two, as there's a decent chance someone else might as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of preview season and have access to consistent, high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for this video. I'll see you for the next one.